What's going on, everybody? Nick Whalen, John McKechnie here from RotoWire. Time to talk some best bets for NFL Week 12. John, we survived Week 11, a bit of a chaotic week across the board. Somehow came out positive in my picks article against the number, despite just some weird results around the NFL. I continue to get burned on the Green Bay Packers every single week. We'll talk a little bit about their big game at home against the Niners this week, but Green Bay is now able to cover 4 in a row. I don't know what that defensive performance was against the Chicago Bears, but that's Week 11. We're focusing on Week 12, and an interesting slate in front of us here. We won't talk TNF by the time you're seeing this or hearing this. That game will likely already be wrapped up, but the Steelers are one of 8 road favorites on this 13-game slate, John.
Yeah, this week is really putting you through the ringer, and it's a little bit more concentrated, obviously, with 6 teams being on bye, so you don't really have quite as many options as you normally would. And Week 14, for those keeping score at home, is going to be similarly bye-week Mageddon type of scene there. Yeah. So buckle up because some of these road favorites, I'm loving it. Some of these, I'm finding ways to poke holes in it, like a bad relationship, and I mean it's all over the place here.
Yeah, in the fantasy world, the bye weeks are rough. Week 14 in particular, I'm very Ravens heavy in my most important leagues, John. So it's gonna be Geno Smith scenes in that Week 14 lineup, unfortunately. But anyway, let's focus on Week 12 here. As always, we each pick 3 games that we want to discuss. We'll give you our picks for those games. You always go first, John. We're sure as hell not breaking that tradition this week. Where are we going?
All right, a little NFC Norse clash. We've got the Minnesota Vikings traveling to Soldier Field to face the Chicago Bears. And the Vikings, 3.5-point favorites in this one. This one's tricky, but I'm leaning with the Vikings. And I think part of it, or a big part of it, really is the defensive philosophy that the Vikings have. They love to get after the quarterback, and they do so successfully. It's not a bunch of empty calorie blitzes. They're actually getting home. They are 3rd in the league, tied for 3rd with 35 sacks. On the other side of that, the Bears have given up the 2nd most sacks in the NFL with 41. Caleb Williams, of course, kind of runs himself into a decent chunk of those. Might mean nothing, but this is an interesting stat from Action Network that Chicago really slumps after playing the Packers for whatever reason. It's almost like the NFL equivalent of when a team the week after they play Navy or something in the college world. They are 1-7 straight up, 1-6-1 against the spread in their last 8 games after facing the Packers. We talked about it a little bit, I think last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, that Chicago is just awful against the division generally, 9-21 and 1 against the spread dating back to 2019. Something that's given me a little bit of is the Bears are 5-1 at home against the spread, but even still, I'm going to lay the wood here. I think that Caleb Williams is going to be put in the blender a little bit.
Yeah, I like this call from you. You know, I'm looking right now at where the bets are coming in, where the money's coming in. It's close to a 50-50 split, 55% of the bets and 55% of the money on Minnesota, which tells me that I do think Chicago earned back a decent amount of respect last week. I don't know how much of that to assign to Chicago versus Green Bay just coming out with a horrendous defensive plan. But you got to give credit to the bounce back for the Bears. I kind of thought that they would not get a post-coordinator firing bounce, and they clearly did. I mean, Caleb Williams, I thought, looked like a completely different player than he had been the previous 3 weeks. But again, I think a lot of that was just poor scheme by the Green Bay Packers. Packers defense could not get off the field. I mean, they gave up, 4 or 5 drives? I think of at least 10 plays. That is not what the Chicago Bears do. They converted more third downs 2 minutes into the third quarter than they had the previous 3 weeks combined. So I trust this Minnesota defense more than I do Green Bay right now. I think this is probably a regression spot for Caleb Williams. I would also lean under on this game too. I still think the Bears defense is a good unit. The Vikings have been turning the ball over the last couple of weeks. And I think if you think Caleb Williams struggles, if you think the Vikings get after him, maybe this is a 13 to 17 point outing for the Chicago Bears. I don't see this being, a 27 plus point game for Minnesota. Weather's not great here in the Midwest. It's not exactly going to be Cleveland on Thursday Night Football, but we got 4 inches of snow right now in Milwaukee. So not going to be exactly pass happy weather in Chicago. So I like your call there. I like the under on 39. My first game, John, taking us to the biggest spread of the week. I suppose tied for the biggest spread of the week at 10.5. We are fading the Carolina Panthers. We're taking the Chiefs with the big number. I know it's dangerous. I know the Chiefs don't cover these big numbers. This is just such a mismatch defensively for the Kansas City team. That's where I think we have the true advantage here. Like, I don't know that the Chiefs are capable of coming out and, pasting the Panthers in the way that the Detroit Lions did the Jaguars last week. I don't think it's a 52-6 type of game. I think this is a utterly dominant 24-3 or 27-6 type of result. Carolina's won 2 in a row. They're coming out of the bye. I don't put a whole lot of stock in beating the New Orleans Saints. I put even less stock in beating the New York Giants on a neutral field in the Daniel Jones is no longer an NFL starting quarterback game. I think this is a huge, huge level up in competition on both sides. I don't see the Chiefs having a letdown here. They need to keep winning all of a sudden. The Steelers, the Bills are hot on their tail for the 1 seed. That is super important to KC. You could make the case that, getting that loss out of the way, maybe that takes some pressure off them as far as the undefeated season goes. I don't read too much into that, but either way, I am buying the Kansas City Chiefs. We are fading the Panthers here. Again, I don't think we get a crazy, crazy blowout. The total's only at 43, but I think the Chiefs defense controls this game, and the Chiefs running game with Pacheco presumably back in the mix. I think that makes a big difference too.
Yeah, the big thing to me here is it's hard to envision Carolina even getting to double-digit points, at least when the game is even remotely within the balance. I think At this point, the ship has kind of largely sailed on expecting the Chiefs to have any modicum of an explosive offense the way that we might have been hoping coming into the season. But the defense, especially after last week, licking their wounds after, letting up some big runs against the Bills, I think they're going to be ready to just kind of put the clamps on this Panthers team. And I don't know if the extra time is going to be enough for this Panthers team to really scheme anything against Spagnuolo and company. It's still a great defense that they have in Kansas City. So therein lies the thing. Do I expect the Chiefs to score much more than 24 in this one? I'm not so sure, but I am much more certain that the Panthers just they more likely flirt with what would be the first shutout, I think, of the entire season here. I think that this would be the game to circle.
Interesting you mentioned that. That's what I was going to close with. That was one of my bold predictions for week 12, which I do every week for our YouTube channel. And, if I hit 2 out of 5, I'm happy with that. But that's one of them that I threw out there. We have not had a shutout in the NFL this season. We had 8 shutouts last year. 8. We have not had a single one through 11 weeks. I think this could be the spot where the KC defense pulls that off. All right, John, your second game. We have a ton of divisional matchups on the slate. I know you want to talk about another one of those.
Yes, I'm loving the divisional games this week. Let's go to Miami. The Dolphins are hosting the Patriots. We talked about it a little bit during the XM show on Monday night. Which of these kind of fringe teams in the AFC playoff picture are you buying right now? I think it was the Dolphins, the Bengals, and maybe Indianapolis. And I put my lot with Miami, and I think that this is a nice part of the schedule coming up for them. And I think also, we have a couple weeks of sample of what they look like since Tua has returned, and the results have been convincing. I think that the offense looks more like it's supposed to, and Miami defensively has actually only allowed the 8th most points in the NFL. So not quite the cotton candy type of defense that you might have expected, especially with all the injuries that they suffered late last year and a little bit into the season this year. Let's see here. Tua has been really good as a big favorite, generally 11-2 against the spread. When you remove the primetime games, I think the 2 time you'd be 11-4 otherwise, but the other ones would be the one where he got hurt earlier this year, and then that wonky one against the Titans last year. But generally, very good as a big favorite. I think the under is also another one to consider here at 46. I'm not sure that the Patriots offense is going to be able to hang with them. I think some mistakes could be coming on the road for Drake May here. I'm not completely out on this Patriots team as being a sneaky team to pick as an underdog the rest of the way, because I am fairly convinced of what we've seen of Drake May thus far. But Miami all of a sudden has a bit of a pulse, and I think that they continue to kind of show why in this setup.
Okay, there we have it. John McKechnie taking the Miami Dolphins to keep it rolling. This would be their 3rd consecutive win. I took New England in my article. With the hook at 7.5, I felt like that was just enough. It's almost cliche to say at this point, but it's just I trust Drake May. I get more and more impressed with him every single week, and He's still working with a really underwhelming stable of pass catchers. He's making it work. They played to a 1-score game last week against the LA Rams, and I actually thought that showed me a lot because I thought Matthew Stafford played his best game of the year. I mean, Stafford had like 2 or 3 just ridiculous throws after a pretty poor game, I thought, against Miami 2 weeks ago. So a nice bounce back for the Rams. New England still kept that under a touchdown, but we'll see. I mean, even in the peak Tom Brady era, the Patriots always struggled when they went down to Miami. So I think this should be a decent spot for the Dolphins. Some motivational edge here too. I mean, the Dolphins are not dead by any means in the AFC playoff picture, and this is obviously a must-win if they want to hang around for a wild card spot. For my next game, John, I'm taking the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are coming off the bye. They're on the road at the New York Giants. The number is 5.5 at FanDuel. Pretty low total in this game, hanging around 41. Part of it is I still have a lot of respect for this Bucs team. I know they've lost 4 in a row. They've lost 4 out of 5 straight up, but they've had a really difficult stretch of schedule without Mike Evans, without Chris Godwin. All indications at this point are that Mike Evans is going to be back. I think that is massive. It's no longer just the Cade Otton show for Tampa Bay. They've been able to move the ball. They've been able to put up points even without those 2 receivers. I think Evans back in the mix really boosts the ceiling for this offense. The running game has also come around. I mean, this is a team that just you pencil in as like a bottom 5 rushing attack for the last few years, but the Bucky Irving, Rashad White, even Sean Tucker trio has really changed things there. I like some Bucky Irving props this weekend. It's also a fade of the New York Giants. Tommy DeVito is not the best quarterback on the roster. He's probably the 3rd best quarterback on the roster. And I don't like to get too much into the off-field narratives, but it's very clear that the Giants players are not buying in on this decision. Drew Lock himself was speaking yesterday, and he's like, yeah, I was told I would be the QB2. I don't really know why I'm not starting. That's the reason I came here, is basically because I thought Daniel Jones would get injured or benched, and I would be the starter. Dexter Lawrence earlier this week said, yeah, Daniel Jones is still the QB1 in my mind. Like, the players I don't think are buying in on this, oh, look at this fun Italian guy. We'll see if he can lead us to a couple of wins narrative. Like, this might be the earliest in a season that I can remember a team outright quitting. And that's kind of what it feels like the Giants are doing to me. I don't like the message that sends to the rest of the roster. Catching the Bucs off a bye, a Bucs team that is still very much alive for the division. Like, I wouldn't mind betting the Bucs right now at like plus 250 to win the NFC South. Like, do we trust the Atlanta Falcons, who've blown a golden opportunity to run away with this division over the last 2 weeks? I don't think I do. So I think it starts here. I think the Buccaneers kind of get back to the team that they were before those receiver injuries. They win this game by at least a touchdown.
Yeah, Tommy Cutlets is so 2023. We've evolved.
You can't recreate that magic.
No, the itch is being scratched right now. Like, we have the Rizzler. Like, we don't need Tommy Cutlets anymore. So but beyond that, I think like my only real pushback here is I'm scared that the number is just 5.5. Like, why is it 5.5? Tommy DeVito is starting against a Buccaneers team that has all those positive tailwinds working for them. So that was the spread that kind of didn't pass the smell test to me, because I would have thought 6.5, 7, maybe even a little bit north of that. But understandably, with this one being on the road for Tampa Bay, maybe that deflates it just a bit. That's a tough place to throw the ball, especially as we get to this time of the year. The winds are swirling in the Meadowlands, of course, but Tampa Bay can run the ball a little bit now. And I think the Giants, they're probably going to be good for a couple turnovers here. So this is one where the gambling brain can trip you up a little bit and you can overthink it. But I think in the end, right call, Tampa and the points.
I think that's a good way to phrase it, is that you start talking yourself into, well, if DeVito gets hot, it's like, no, man, it's as simple as a fade of Tommy DeVito. For what it's worth, I think the number is where it is because the Bucs defense has been terrible. So as far as like spots for DeVito to step into, it's not that bad. I mean, the Bucs defense has been handing out yards to everybody, but again, you're coming off of games against Kansas City and San Francisco. I think this is a bit of a level down, a much needed level down in competition. All right, John, your third game. Where are we finishing out?
All right. Well, this one's real gambling brain stuff. I will take the Indianapolis Colts plus 7.5 at home against the Detroit Lions. Boy, it feels scary to bet against the Detroit Lions, but I feel okay about a home underdog of 7 or more points. Indianapolis actually been pretty good against the spread at home this year, 4-1. They looked better last week than I think a lot of people, myself included, expected against the Jets. It's gonna be tough to get there, but there's also, and this is more kind of woo-woo, not a lot of concrete behind this, but you do wonder about a Lions team that, just had such a cakewalk last week. You face a real team with a real pulse on the road, maybe a little smidge of a letdown spot. Any team is almost vulnerable to a letdown at some point. I feel like the Lions haven't really had one. I know that they didn't play well, of course, against the Texans a few weeks ago when Goff was throwing all the interceptions. Maybe that was their de facto, sort of wake-up call. But I think Indianapolis has enough of a backbone here to keep this one within the number. I'm just kind of praying for the hook to save me here.
This is a tough one for me. I actually like Detroit, and I'm worried that I'm just falling into the Lions are unbeatable, they're just going to steamroll everybody narrative. You look at where the money's coming in. I think you might be on the right side of this, John, because 88% of the bets, 99% of the money is on Detroit to cover the 7.5.
Now I'm good.
Big time public fade there. I'm gonna go square trust Detroit, and it's partially because of something you mentioned. Like Anthony Richardson looked, I thought, incredible last week. Easily the best game of his career. I read that I think 10 of his 11 downfield passes were on target. That's not normal for Anthony Richardson. It came against the New York Jets, John. This is a very bad football team. It's a team that is not top 300 yards of offense in 3 straight games. I think it's a defense that is wildly overvalued. It's coasting on reputation from last year. It's coasting on some of the name value of guys like Sauce Gardner, who've just been average players so far this season. So I think there is a better chance that we see an Anthony Richardson regression game than Anthony Richardson repeating anything close to what he did last week.
Yeah, you can't give Indianapolis too much credit for beating the Jets, but relative to where I was on them going into last week, where that was kind of the ultimate stay away for me a week ago, they showed me enough to where I think they can kind of absorb a few of these punches here coming from Detroit. So I think that they'll keep this one respectable. That's all we need.
For my third and final game, we are going to go to the Eagles and the Rams. For one, I'll say I like the under here, 49, but I'm going to take the Eagles -2.5 on the road. I think this Eagles team, despite my continued concerns about Nick Sirianni's decision-making on a week-to-week basis, they've overcome that and become one of the most consistent teams in the NFL. They consistently start slow every week and get better and better as games go along. I think this is a spot where they probably start slow again because they do that every week. They've scored 14 total points in the first quarter. Part of the reason I like the under here. But I think they're going to grind out this Rams defense. It's a Rams defense that feels like it's equally likely to no-show or play really well in any given week. I think there are huge advantages here in the trenches on both sides for Philly. I think they'll be able to get after Matthew Stafford. This is not a very good Rams offensive line. I know the Rams pass rush has certainly been better. Jared Verse has been fantastic. Philly just runs the ball so much that I think that's somewhat neutralized. Philly is dead last in the NFL in pass attempts. They have become this run first wagon, and they cling to that throughout the game, right? It's been terrible for AJ Brown and Devontae Smith fantasy managers. It's been fantastic if you have Jalen Hurts or Saquon Barkley. They have an identity and they stick to that identity every single week. They never waver. And I like teams that I think are predictable. Getting this under 3 is big. You could argue that there's a motivational edge here for the Rams. You lose this game and all of a sudden you could find yourself in last place in the NFC West pretty easily. So it's not quite a must win for the Rams, but they need it more than Philly does. I don't care. I think the Eagles dominate this game on the ground. I like Philly -2.5.
Yeah, I think you have it right here. I'm still hesitant on this Rams team, and I think that for as good as Stafford looked last week, as it's going to be hard to replicate that once again this week. We're just a couple weeks removed from them just playing that goofy game against Miami at home in prime time. So there's the Rams. You got to respect them, but I think Philly is probably the second best team in the NFC, and I think that they'll show it again. 2.5 is a pretty attainable number for them.
Yeah, this Rams team, even when they win, it's never as convincing as it should be. It's like I feel like every game they've won this year, they've had a chance to drive down and put points on the board to make a 1-score game, a 2-score game, and they could never close it out. Even last week against New England, they gave the Patriots a decent chance to go down and win that game. And of course, Drake May threw the exact same interception that he did a few weeks ago against Tennessee to end it. But the Rams passed on like a 40-something, it would have been like 47 yards, I think, to go up 2 scores and punted from the New England 35-yard line. It's like, I don't think they trust their kicker. I don't trust their late game execution. The running game has been very hit or miss. So I'm on the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's get to the prop market, John. I know you actually have a couple props for that game that you like.
I do. I'm going to fade Christian McCaffrey. I'm going to take the under 111 and a half rushing and receiving yards. I still don't think he's going to get the rushing workload or have the rushing success. And I think that Green Bay has enough, especially with San Francisco not having their full group of pass catchers. Green Bay can kind of spend a little bit more bandwidth on slowing McCaffrey's ability to get yards on them through the air. So I'm going to take the under on that one. I'm going to take the over on Jaden Reed, 48.5. I think he's just so explosive that, just a couple of plays, maybe even one catch can do this for him. So I'll take the over 48.5. I like Devon Achane, 2 or more touchdowns. Give me plus 270 on that at FanDuel. He's been electric all year. Even when Tua was out, he was kind of carrying whatever excuse of an offense that they had. Now that Tua is back, his workload and his effectiveness have really stayed consistent and gone up. Even you could argue. So I think that he's going to be a problem for this New England defense. I don't have it officially on the card, but Jonnu Smith also kind of an interesting one if you can find an anytime touchdown prop on him. I like Quentin Johnston, anytime touchdown. That's plus 200 at DraftKings. I think the Ravens figured out some stuff with their secondary. The safety rotation of Ardarius Washington and Kyle Hamilton, I think, is going to be the thing moving forward. No more Marcus Williams to pick on. So that kind of opens things up for the receivers more so than the tight ends, although I think, it's still a good setup for this Los Angeles tight ends. But I like QJ's ability here. I think he's going to be a mismatch for a guy like Nate Wiggins potentially. I think that the Chargers are going to test them through the air. So give me a touchdown there. And I'll take the over on CJ Stroud passing yards. It's an attainable number, 231.5. He's gone over this in 3 of his last 4. You just kind of gave me some extra wind in my sails with that Nico Collins detail and what that means to this offense going up against Tennessee. Give me the Stroud over.
I like it, John. I like it. Tennessee, quietly a decent run defense. I think this is a pass script for Houston, and love the call on Jonnu Smith as well, who I feel like it's just kind of taken over as like the new Jalen Waddle in that offense. Like I actually really think that's part of the reason Waddle has struggled is the emergence of a real tight end in Miami, a team that has traditionally just not really even thought about the tight end position over the last few years. I'm going to go Caleb Williams, under 201.5 passing yards. You laid out the case for why this could be a big regression spot for the Bears offense going up against that Brian Flores defense for the first time this season. I'm going to go Drake May, over 208.5 passing yards, and also Kendrick Bourne, over 2.5 receptions. I do think the Patriots are going to be able to hang around in this game. I think it's going to have to be through the air. Love what I'm seeing from Drake May. Talked about Nico Collins, over 5.5 receptions. He was targeted 7 times last week, despite being on a pitch count. I don't think we see a pitch count this week, so I love that one. Bucky Irving, over 68.5 rushing and receiving yards. He's gone over this number already in 4 of his last 5 games. We're taking a Travis Kelce anytime touchdown against Carolina Panthers. One of the worst defenses in the NFL, specifically one of the worst defenses against tight ends. They've given up a league high 7 touchdowns to the tight end position. And we're running it back with Will Dissly, John. We hit the Dissly anytime TD last week. We're not getting quite as much value this time around, but Will Dissly anytime touchdown, plus 180. We know about the Ravens secondary. I think this could be a second straight shootout for the Chargers.
Yeah, and traditionally, John Harbaugh, really good over team in prime time, especially on the road. So this game on Monday night could get a little bit crazy. I'm going to be home in Maryland for that one. Very excited to watch that with my dad, who's going to get way too worked up during the game. It's going to be a really good time. But when Will Dissly scores that touchdown, I'll at least know that you're cashing a pretty decent ticket.